Thank you. Ryan Urkeba with Historical Concepts.
And Matt Schaefer with Historical Concepts.
Thank you, Mayor Brady and Council, for having us back to give you all a report of the status of our involvement with you all for the Andrew Street corridor and 57 East Broad Street. We're going to go over a lot of content this evening, so we'll probably be moving quickly. But I invite you all to ask questions as we go, just to make it more conversational, and that way we don't forget questions or comments as we go. I understand our time commitment that we have. So high level, tonight we're going to talk about the context for this whole corridor between Andrew Street all the way down to 57. We'll first then drill into the Andrew Street corridor and our process to date involving the public meeting that happened on June 18th and our summary from that. And then we'll move on to 57 East Broad Street and our concept for that area, present that to you and get your feedback. And then we'll finish with a summary of both of those together, as well as discussing next steps and the timeline for that. So we're going to start by looking at Noonan from 1911. This is a map we dug up from the archives, and encircled in red is the area that we'll be discussing this evening. But more importantly, what we wanted to learn from this map and portray to you all is that in 1911, Noonan was probably about 80 years old at that point, still growing. And as you can see from the street grid, there was a fair amount of streets and blocks in downtown, specifically the 9-block area around the courthouse square. You'll note that in the middle. Very small blocks, about 208 feet on each side, but as soon as you move out from that, those blocks tend to grow in scale. And they become very asymmetric, if you will, and the streets take on different patterns. And then you eventually, on the east side, run into the railroad. So just have that in your mind as we talk forward here. Since then, we've only added a few small streets in this same district. So if I go back and forth, you can see the added darker orange color in these areas. And so that's partly due to land becoming more available, or some industrial land that was then turned over to some residential streets and the like. But that growth happened in smaller block forms, as you can see, versus the larger blocks that were there previously. So why are smaller blocks better? Why are streets good for cities? We went over this with the public on the 18th of June. Streets and blocks create more efficient network for vehicles and pedestrians to move around. They give you more route options so that it helps to distribute traffic around town. There's more on-street parking. You all have a pattern of diagonal parking on your streets, which adds a lot of parking capability to your streets, taking that pressure off of the blocks in the private development. And there's more access to private property, a very clear reason to have public right-of-way, which then creates value for that land. More street frontage we have, the more front yards, the more front doors, and the more street fronts that we can have and provide to property owners, which means that there's more opportunity to create development, whether that's an ice cream shop or a hair salon or whatnot. Those are all great benefits to the city. And all of this results in what I think the goal is for you as council members, is to create a place of density, a city that feels like it's got a strong identity, and reducing the amount of sprawl outside of the city limits. Part of our research involved looking back through some of your past documents, planning documents. One that resonated a lot with us was this report from 2014, which was the Livable Centers Initiative report. This was won by a grant by the city, and this planning group came in and did this whole analysis and then created a vision plan for the city, specifically focused in the area encircled in that kind of gray dotted line. So essentially, the core of downtown, the 9-block square, and to the east. Knowing we all know that to the west is a pretty substantial single-family fabric and pretty intact. The series of maps we're going to share here are very important to our analysis of the east side of downtown. This first one, building conditions, mapping, well, the lighter color gold is standard, a good quality building stock. You go to the darker gold, and that's substandard, and then to red is deteriorating, and then gray is vacant. So what we can learn from this is there's a fair amount of that happening, specifically in the encircled red area, the area that we're talking about, but also just across the whole eastern side of downtown. And part of that has to do with a lack of access and care for this side of downtown. Going back from 2014 to today, it's not a whole lot different, although we do know there's two owners now, new owners, for those large red parcels. Similarly, pedestrian facilities, specifically sidewalks, are almost non-existent in the eastern side, definitely in our district. So those red lines are non-existent sidewalks. And then the blue are sidewalks that are sufficient. So all the more important to create connected streets so that we can create connected sidewalks leading to downtown. Owner-occupied homes. We can look at this and see there is quite a lack of residential in the downtown, kind of downtown east area. In 2014, it probably doesn't look a whole lot different today. Although we know that what's not showing up here is some apartments above retail in the core downtown area. But what we can learn from this is that there is kind of a mix of owner and for rent properties on the east side. The owner being the orange, for rent being the gold. And the goal we see as part of this study is to how do we increase more residential in this district, specifically in the area that we're talking about. Part of the summary of that document was this slide, which kind of brings solutions to all of those scenarios that were portrayed there. Let's see if I can do this pointer. Oops. All right, the pointer's not working. So you can see there is a suggestion that Andrew Street become an extension, so that T4 north-south connection in 2 points is a big part of the Andrew Street initiative. The restoration of the mill into some readaptive use is part of that. And then coming on down to 57 East Broad Street, obviously that whole parcel, looking for a redefinition of what that use could be. Clearly an initiative that's part of your purchase of that land and what we're doing moving forward. And then another suggestion as part of this was the link trail that runs north-south along the tracks on the west side, which is along Andrew Street. So essentially this becomes the framework for what we're doing here today. Any questions on that summary of the report?
Anyone?
Great. So we'll dive into Andrew Street, our process with that property to date. We all know that the seed of this idea most recently came probably about a year ago when we all partnered with your city staff to create a vision for the Andrew Street corridor with some design interns that were working in our office. And I think it was well received, and that's why we were asked to come back and look at this with a more critical eye moving forward. So we held, as part of our kickoff and understanding phase for this scope, we held a public meeting on June 18th. This is some summary photos and documentation of what we heard there on that evening. So we had roughly about 50, 55 people attend. There were business owners, there were some homeowners that lived in the area, and then people that were from elsewhere around town in attendance. We thought it was a very good outcome. We did a presentation very similar to this, starting off, and then we broke up into smaller groups so that we could have more intimate conversation and question and answer session with the residents. And we asked some questions about what they would like to see here. And we also had 3 image boards printed out that they all got to look at, a collection of photographs as a way to kind of cast a vote of what made sense or what looked good to them, and how that could be applied to the Andrew Street corridor. It was a big cross-section of imagery. We have some slides of that next. But this slide summarizes the outcome of that. So the vision statement that we've crafted based on language that we got from written documents, but also verbal conversation we had during the table time, was that the vision statement is that the end result should be a dynamic neighborhood blending together different uses, building styles, and people groups. Green spaces and safe pedestrian and bike infrastructure should be integral and welcoming. We heard a lot of words used to describe the vision for this place. Friendly, eclectic, and accessible were 2 repeated words, 3 repeated words during that evening's discussion. And from a design aspect, there was a lot of conversation around connecting street grid, and that the district should feel like an extension of downtown in both scale and character. To create inviting places that people can connect, relax, and share their lives in. Retain existing buildings and assets that were there throughout the property. There's some industrial buildings, there's the old mill, the water tower, all that kind of lends to the aspect and the uniqueness of this district. And a lot of people wanted to see that stay, and also inform the new structures. And then build attractive, sort of must-see district. People saw this as a place to kind of draw people that may be different from downtown or other parts of town that doesn't exist today. Program kind of varied, but it did resonate with a lot of people to see housing of all types. People wanted to see people of all types living here, and that included for sale and for rent. And then people liked things that looked like cottages, and they liked things that looked like townhouses. And we've got a little bit of a more detailed summary of that in the next slide. So a balanced mix of shops, restaurants, and gathering spaces. Sufficient parking. Parking was of concern. So as we add these new uses, we want to make sure we have sufficient parking. And then new life for the mill along Augusta Drive was important. And then open spaces, both green and sort of urban plaza or hardscape spaces. So very much in keeping with what the character of downtown is now, and a lot of this speaks to what is lacking in the Andrew Street corridor. These 3 small versions of the boards that you see here represent what we presented. And hopefully on your printouts, you can see a little more clearly the green and red numbers there. Green were green dots on images where people liked that image and could see it in the district. Red was something that they didn't like. Each person was given 6 red, 6 green, and they could cast a vote over these 3 boards how they felt. And so we found over the years in doing this process, using photography as a way to have conversation with people gives them the ability to speak in terms that they can't do verbally based on what they like and what they don't like. We also created this form on the top right that prompted a few questions and had people write down written comments, which led to the vision statement and some of those other words you saw on the previous slide. So in summary, when we look at the images that were shared, this board gives you sort of the top 6 green dot or good votes or preferred votes across all of those images, which I think was about 26 different images. And you can see very quickly here that a lot of people were drawn to things that look kind of like what some of the buildings look there today. So brick was a big part of it. The scale of buildings being kind of 1, 2, and maybe 3 stories seem to get the most responses. Spaces that are, excuse me, green and have, shade and places to sit and gather, but also some spaces that maybe expand indoor spaces to the outdoors, like on the bottom right. And then the idea of creating a destination space. So there was, a lot of likes for this little amphitheater type structure in the top center there. Any questions on the summary of our public session?
Quick question for you on the themes representing these images. The second one says buildings of an industrial and more vernacular character. What do you mean by vernacular character?
You want to speak to that?
Sure. So rather than either a more formal and classical character or also not a more contemporary and modern character, having something that's more about true to the regional vernacular, using the word vernacular to explain what we mean by vernacular, but something that's more true to the region and also of a more humble character.
Yes, I think the 2 opposing photos, the bottom left and the top right, speak to that. Those are not in Newnan, but I would hope that you could see those being in Newnan because they kind of fit into what exists here already. When we look at photos like this in New England, that vernacular will look much different because it's based on that place, whether it's the brick color or the stone that was used or, that kind of thing. Anyone else?
Were you satisfied with the attendance at the meeting with brown and black people?
Good question. It was not very mixed to my recollection. No, it was not.
Okay, so we may have to work on that a little bit.
Yes. So the way that was advertised, we did create flyers, paper flyers that were then left at each residence and business. And then it was posted on the city website, which you all probably are aware of.
Okay.
How far out did you go with those flyers?
It was just that district, I believe. You can.
And city staff did it, we went door to door, walking around, knocking doors, people would come, we gave them to them in the door, so it was all located within the target area, but then all the adjacent areas. Kind of like on this property or 2 off, and address 2 off, and then it was on all city socials, I think the newspaper ran 2 or 3 things, on our website.
Yeah, we'll have to talk about how to get to the neighbors' hoods.
Well, the intent of this one was the property owners, and that was the real intent. The intent wasn't to go out into the other neighborhoods.
Neighborhoods.
It was actually to get the property owners involved.
Yeah, just.
We can certainly do other, but that was the intent of that meeting.
Just to add a little, I guess, perspective on that is it is a corridor project, so it's kind of 2 new segments of street, making a new roadway, and a lot of the property is privately held, except for the county properties. There is some city property at the southern end, so there's that part of the perspective. All right. So from there, about a month ago, we started looking at this from a design standpoint. So this is an aerial photograph of that area. We do have the property lines overlaid on that, which is a little faint on the screen here. But you can see here Andrew Street in this area. So as we looked at this, a lot of the comments during the first portion of the public meeting were trying to clarify what our goal was for designing here. So there was a lot of misconception when the intern plan was shared, I think probably here in a council meeting last year, and then also shared on the website, that we were designing over people's land or there was taking of land. So we had to take time and explain that that was just a vision. So when we came back to our tables and started designing, the first thing we did was say, all right, let's more closely evaluate the land that we're dealing with here. So In pink, you have public right-of-way. And then in yellow, you have the city-owned properties within this district. And then in purple, you have the county-owned properties within the district. And then in green, we have some privately owned land that some of those we know specifically. They're willing partners in this corridor project. And then some we made a little bit of a judgment call based on the quality, this dilapidated building here, that would probably redevelop when Andrew Street gets reinvested in. So we carved back, and basically we are looking at just public right-of-way, city-owned land, county-owned land, and then those willing partners in the private sector. In red, we are not drawing over or designing for any of the land that's in red here that's either a functioning business today or a home that's occupied. So that was the first course of action following the public meeting for us. And then we went back to the drawing board on starting with, okay, the primary mission here is to create Andrew Street as a connected street from Augusta Drive down to Washington. So that's what this slide depicts. And so this is a 55-foot, is it 55 foot? 50-foot right-of-way, north to south. We've got a little drawing here that depicts what that looks like. So we have northbound and southbound lanes. We have a parking lane on the left side of the street only. And then we've got a 5-foot sidewalk on that left side of the street or west side. On the east side, we have a tree lawn, and then we are locating the link trail on that side of the property, or on that side of the right-of-way, rather, in place of a sidewalk. And that is due to the limitation of the right-of-way that exists currently. So in the new right-of-ways that we were creating, we were just extending that same 50-foot distance. So that is our proposed infrastructure for the connection of Andrew Street from north to south.
What's the typical right-of-way width right now on Andrew?
On Andrew Street, it is 50.
Okay.
Some of the east-west streets are 60, I believe. Do you remember offhand?
Within this district, for the most part, they are all 50-foot right-of-ways.
Okay.
So Cochran and Casey Street and Lee Street. And then once you get down more towards Madison and Washington and into the 9 block of downtown, they're a lot wider.
Yeah.
What's the
80 feet.
length of that road approximately? Proposed road, potential road?
Good
I'm
question.
not sure off the top of my head.
Yes, I don't remember that. Any other questions?
The, quick, on the left side would be a sidewalk, on the right side is the link.
Correct.
Is that a little redundant to do that?
So most of your right-of-ways do have a sidewalk on both sides, which is 5 feet. We think that the link trail needs to be a part of the right-of-way. There's not a lot of space to create the link trail elsewhere in this corridor, i.e., say, on the backs of the properties next to the tracks. That's just not going to happen without a lot of those buildings coming down. So the next best scenario was to replace one sidewalk with a 12-foot trail system.
So just so I'm clear on you have an estimated cost from 2019 study of $2.3 million, which includes purchases of new row. So define row, is this
Yes.
so, I'm sorry, did somebody say something?
Right away.
Okay,
Right away.
all right, right away. Thank you. But that being said, is that the build of the road or just the purchase of the property and moving of utilities, and what are the additional costs over and above the 2.3?
So this is an estimate that I believe the city solicited back in 2019 as part of a T-Splost bid. And so obviously these are 5-year-old numbers to start with. But this does include, as it states, the purchase of right-of-way 50 foot by that length and then 50 foot by this length. And then it includes all the improvements that we outline here, except for the fact that we are expanding a 5-foot sidewalk to a 12-foot path.
I think they did have that in the estimate.
Oh, did they?
2019.
Okay.
Yeah, 'cause we-
All right, I stand
that's what
corrected.
we said, and Link Trail. So it would, that was the estimated cost to get to that finished product.
Great, thanks for correcting.
Well, as these gentlemen have pointed out, this is just information you have, and it's close to 6 years old.
This is correct.
It would be,
It would be a much different number today.
yes, I would caution the council against taking that number and placing it in their mind somewhere that that's what this is, because it's not.
So it's
We
not
don't
that
know what
number,
it is,
it's
but
more.
It's not that number,
Correct.
right, okay.
We wanted to give some sense of framework based on information that was provided us.
Sure, it's
So-
the facts we had in 2019,
Right,
yeah, not good today.
right.
Quick question on design. On the third bullet on the right of way, it says street trees and planting strip on both sides. Looking at the rendering, again, it's just a rendering, 5 foot on the northbound side and let's say about 2 feet on the southbound side. I don't see much being planted on a 2-foot strip.
No, no,
The
good question.
The 5-foot strip, I mean, you plant a tree, especially, Noonan, we have good oak trees, you're gonna have a severe buckling at 5 foot. I mean,
No.
that's pretty much impractical.
Right,
for
so
much of anything there.
the 2 feet is just grass, and then behind that car on the left, so this is a parking lane, and then there will be bulb outs every, say, 4 cars. You'll have a bulb out, an 8-foot wide by usually 10 or 12 foot long, that a tree is planted in that.
Okay.
And that was, again, in order for us to fit all this into a 50-foot right-of-way, that was the best scenario that we found to make that work. The 2-foot grass strip allows you to open a car door without hitting somebody that's walking on the sidewalk, so that's a pretty critical dimension as well. But in order to get trees on both sides of the streets, we included those bulb outs, every so many car lengths.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I see that on the southbound, then 5 foot on the right side, the northbound side, that's, again, kind of impractical for, reality. To get much, a large tree growing there.
5 is fairly common in urban districts, I will say, but, ideally, if you talk to a landscape architect, they're gonna, want more, but, it's proven that 5 can work, especially if it's a linear strip versus a square, tree pit. Any other questions on the right-of-way before we move to the plan? Great. So, this is our current proposed vision plan for you all based on the data to date. Again, we're looking at properties that are assuming to be a part of this process, including city, county, and then willing private property owners. Leaving those that own private land, whether they be businesses or residences, to choose at some point in the future whether they want to, redevelop their parcel or sell or whatnot. So we're intentionally not drawing over or designing for those parcels. So just high level, I'm going to share some principles that we're proposing here with the design. Again, this is not the plan. This is a vision to help you all as leaders for the city to entice new development here. And so some of the principles that we will portray in our future document to guide this is when new buildings get built, they get built up close to the street, so they act like urban buildings, and they don't have the large parking lots in front, much like a lot of those industrial buildings do today. And then as best possible, the parking gets put, in the back or along the side of those buildings. So that's a key principle. Another one is, we mentioned it earlier, where you do have some old buildings, i.e. the jail, try to take advantage and retrofit those for new uses because aesthetically they're a good value to the character of the place. So the jail is a good example. There are some of the industrial buildings that are currently auto shops and whatnot that we think could have some interesting character if they got, turned into some other use in the future. That would be fantastic. When we're looking at the larger blocks, similar principles apply. We suggest that parking happening in parking lots behind buildings, that you extend buildings all the way around the block as best possible, creating just access ways to get into that parking below. Some developers may want to park under buildings, or if they're really adventuresome, maybe build a parking deck for themselves. So those are guidelines that we will outline as part of the deliverable for you all to kind of give some high-level suggestions for redevelopment. To the north, we recognize that there's a stream corridor with a buffer, which is the blue line is the stream corridor buffer. It has different layers of control between the state and local jurisdictions, but we would love to see some of that being improved, and maybe some trailways connecting over from the path, the link trail rather, and the sidewalks that maybe creates a little bit of a linkage around Casey Street. Maybe perhaps one day that could connect over across to the mill structure if there are uses there that would be invited to pedestrians. In the areas of the residential district around Cochran and Casey and Lee Street and then Perry, there's a little segment there. In the future, we are suggesting that, that pedestrian sidewalks be considered. One of the comments we heard a couple of times during the public meeting was that some of the residents here would love to walk to downtown or to a park, but sometimes feel unsafe because there are parked cars in the street and they're having to walk in the street because there's no sidewalks, and then they're walking around parked cars into moving traffic. So one suggestion we would make outside of Andrew Street itself is that it be considered that pedestrian facilities be put on these streets, at least on one side, if not possible to do it on both, to create better pedestrian connectivity for residents in and through the area here. Anything else, Matt, that we should add? Nope. Any questions regarding this plan?
Am I reading that correctly, that you're looking at a pedestrian connection also between Lee and Olive?
So we're making a suggestion there. So Lee and Olive, this is where Councilwoman was discussing. These are all private properties. There is a shared property line in this alignment. As a way to create better connectivity for pedestrians from this portion of the district to the south, and then potentially to, you know, a reuse of the jail, and then potentially down to 57 East Broad. There could be an easement perhaps that is partially shared on the backs of those properties to provide a pedestrian connection through that block. That is a suggestion. It's not a requirement by any means. One of the reasons we suggested it is because it helps to reduce the size of the block and make pedestrian connectivity a little bit less cumbersome. Again, going back to our earlier conversation about the benefit of smaller blocks. They don't have to all be defined by streets. They could be defined by pedestrian connections as well. So ideally, we'd like to see maybe an inter-block connection all the way through here, but that is just a suggestion.
No, I get it. Now I got a couple more questions about that. Is that residential through there, or is it industrial through that?
That's facing Perry Street, I believe, mostly office
Office
on there.
cars, okay.
Yeah. And then
There's two residents there. Okay.
Okay. Anyone else?
I've got a question.
Yes, sir.
This is for Tracy too, about zoning. So with kind of the design that you've thrown up there, which we could find a lot of that stuff in our current guidelines. Tracy, do we need to create, if we proceeded, would we create anything additional on zoning or building criteria? I mean, are we already covering all this with buildings built to the street and things like that, like downtown?
Yeah, I think that part of their project is gonna be to introduce some design guidelines and so forth for this area.
So we would need additional guidelines based on this project? Okay,
Yes.
perfect.
Yes, part of this scope, we're going to make some sort of high-level suggestions. There has been discussion about us creating guidelines of sorts, perhaps for all of downtown or maybe just this district. That would be an additional or separate scope, depending on the detail that's needed. We do know that there are existing guidelines for downtown that speak more specifically to existing or historic buildings. So there is some loopholes when you're talking about new buildings on undeveloped sites or redeveloped sites. And we think there could be some gaps filled there with a supplement or a new document altogether.
So, go back, just sum it up. We've got the mill property at the end,
Yes,
it's
sir.
private, and then we've got a property that is kind of heading south, almost to the end of the road that
Right
we've
here.
got to get through. But other than
Correct.
that, our right-of-way is sufficient that we currently have, so we really could put a road in if we had agreeable green people.
Correct.
Okay.
And there is right-of-way and utilities already in those segments. It's just that they would need to be improved. And then the green, there is no improvements at all in those two segments. So it would be purchasing or trading that land and then doing full improvements in those segments.
Mr. Mayor, I'd be interested in hearing about 57 East Water.
Sure, let's.
Great.
Let's move.
We will move along. Another suggestion, again, is that perhaps a further consideration is that Casey Street maybe one day connect over to Andrew Street to, again, complete a block. Just something to consider in the future that would require the purchase of a portion of a private parcel here and then a portion of the mill property here. And then because we could see some of this being commercial use, we could see an alleyway come through there. Again, just a high-level suggestion for future investment. 57 East Broad. Here we are today, looking at the site conditions, a pad-ready site, essentially. We are generally sloping from high in this corner to low down here. And we do have some kind of edge conditions to deal with as far as topography and abutting adjacent buildings. We have a decent amount of tree canopy on the edge of the railroad corridor to the east to contend with. This little roadway here that leads into the depot parking lot is the extension of Andrew Street, just for context. So we see that coming through to that point. So we did a similar process here, is sort of taking a step back, trying to understand what the land could achieve. So council, when we were with you last summer, I believe it was, with the council retreat 2 summers ago. Time flies. We shared a particular graphic where we outlined the 9-square grid over top of this parcel of land. And that looked a little bit like this graphic here. So we took the 208-foot square block and we just tiled it over the 5 acres of land, just to kind of give you a quick vision of what it would mean to extend that 9-block area into this land. Now we know we're dealing with topo, but it was just a high-level concept. So we actually started with that from an analysis standpoint and said, okay, well, if we do that, what does that look like? And then we then went from there and looked at other scenarios for creating right-of-way or streets that would break down that parcel of land into smaller blocks. Again, the goal of creating blocks that have real streets with real pedestrian connectivity and utilities on them to extend the urban fabric of this district, which is much different than what you were seeing 2 and 3 and 4 years ago from proposals for development that treated this all as one development site. So, in our analysis, we decided to put some numbers to these different graphics, just to, at high level, give you a sense of how to evaluate this. And these numbers are, again, provided based on an estimate of linear footage costs for creating new right-of-way, and what that would look like as far as city investment just to build out these streets in red that you see. And this, again, high level, just for us to kind of quickly look and see how do we evaluate moving forward and selecting between these.
Is the red what we already own? Because I think that's what we wanted you to look at, was what we already own.
So let me just go back. So that's what we own, outlined in red here. We don't own this frontage here. This is all privately held.
So why are we talking about that right now? When I thought this engagement was just what city owns.
Correct.
The design concept is only looking at this site, but we do want to think about how any public right-of-ways would, fit into the existing street grid. So that was where we got to that diagram study.
So Spring Street right here, you can see how that can extend into the street, or into the parcel rather. And that actually works pretty easily from a grade standpoint. And so this is the city block we use, and we kind of stamp that down over this property. And if you extended that length here, you could see that there potentially could be another street somewhere in here. So that's what you're seeing here in this diagram. Again, this was an extension of what we did as a concept, as almost a collage 2 years ago, just to show what extending that grid would look like. That means purchasing a right-of-way here and a right-of-way here to make that work. Internally, we said, well, that's probably not as viable, so let's look at a scenario where we're not purchasing an additional right-of-way here. We do think this one is critical. Extending Spring Street is pretty important in our minds to creating a better street framework in the district, no matter what scenario you looked at here. So we essentially went from sort of the most investment from a right-of-way and street infrastructure to the least, and looked at the metrics of what that gave you. So you can see here linear footage of right-of-way, and then what the yield would be in linear footage of street frontage. So what that would give you in the amount of front doors, essentially, on those streets. So if you look at this top red number and the bottom green number across these four, you can see how those kind of jump pretty quickly from over 2,000 to just over 1,000 of linear footage of right-of-way investment, and then conversely what that gives you in developable acreage or linear footage along the streets. So what we deducted from our analysis is this is a lot more investment because we have to purchase 2 more pieces of land to get those right-of-ways, and it's a lot of investment in right-of-way. Additionally, even though there's a lot of frontage created here, some of these blocks are not the most efficient for contemporary program and construction and parking needs today. So we felt like somewhere in sort of this area was the better place to be with the amount of infrastructure invested and the amount of land created by building these streets. This last one we felt didn't give us quite enough definition in the blocks. Any other questions on that before I move to the preferred?
We've got a 6:30.
Yes, sir.
6:13. We're gonna need a little short break in between. So
Okay, we're getting there.
Your hard stop is 22 after.
Yes, sir. Here is our proposed right-of-way plan for you all. We're going to connect Andrew Street from Broad all the way through, essentially kind of in its current alignment, coming all the way down from Augusta way up, down to Salavidi Street. It essentially parallels the railroad tracks, and then extending Spring Street across into the site. Here's that piece of land that we suggest that be considered for the ability to extend that across. That creates 4 blocks for you. They are generally sized to a lot of the historic blocks. Again, thinking back to that first slide I shared with you all. Thus breaking down the developable areas into smaller portions that will invite the kinds of uses and developers that I think you are hoping to attract. And so you can see the land area for each parcel between 0.66 acres all the way up to 1.6 acres there. We do suggest that this road right-of-way be very similar to what we had up in Andrew Street, but we can do a 60-foot here, so a little bit more green space, but still a sidewalk on one side, the link trail on the east. And then part of the discussion with the steering committee, which was primarily your city staff, there was a high recommendation to create some sort of green space as part of this district. This is about 0.2 acres of green and a little bit of urban space or hardscape as part of that. And we located it in the middle, given the fact that we've got Bicentennial Park considered over here and some other green space around the perimeter. We felt like that was a good synergistic location.
Quick question for you.
Yes, sir.
Looking at that, kind of combining your blocks C and D almost, but in order, that 1 acre lot at the north section there and the 0.66 acre, putting a road down to that connector down there in order to break those blocks up a little bit, make them more usable.
So you're talking
Is that
about
considered at all?
adding one here?
And then keep going north up to East Broad, so right there, yeah, those 2 blocks there.
We did, yeah, we did consider that, let's see, I mean, that's essentially a portion of this one here,
Exactly,
Yeah.
without cutting everything out and not having all of that.
right?
I think you'll see then, when we get to the next slide, that has more of the program pieces that are starting to fit within those blocks, where we needed, it was working out the best to have Andrew Street continue where it was, and to then have another block, mid-block connection, or another street between Andrew and Perry going north, really shrunk the size of those first 2 blocks, and it was starting to be restrictive to some of the proposed program.
Gotcha.
So let's jump to that so we can see how this could develop based on proposed right-of-way. So we know that there is an interested party that may do a hotel here of 125 keys. So we've located that on the northernmost block here in proximity to Broad Street and on with some frontage on the new green space. And it's also next to what we propose to be the location for a parking deck here that would be a city parking deck of 4 levels. So there could be some shared parking usage there between the hotel, which would have a high parking need, and the rest of the development in this area. The parking deck would serve as a good buffer to the rail noise, so that was the reason for locating that there. Hotel makes a lot of sense being closest to downtown and visible along Broad Street, a fairly heavily trafficked corridor. And then the remainder of the buildings are less defined. They can be commercial, they could be office, they could be residential. We've done a little key diagram down in the bottom left of what the potential ground floor use could be. So in red, these could be ideal locations for commercial operations, whether it's a restaurant, a coffee shop, whatnot. And then the blue could be either an office or some sort of meeting space. We do see a lot of, uses up on the second floor being that kind of use. And if it's a 3-story building, maybe even the next story up. The yellow in this would be different forms of residential, again, noting the need for residential in this district. This is a hypothetical program that could be yielded from this plan that you see here. Based on our professional experience and, using parking as a limiter, using square footage and building sizes as a limiter for that. We have a collection of two-story building along Broad Street to be sensitive to the historic buildings here, and then 4-story on the hotel, and then most of the other buildings we were showing at 3 stories in the middle, and then Salabidi went back down to 2. So kind of cascading back down to the edges to be sensitive, but then allowing it to come up a little bit in the middle.
I have a question for you.
Yes.
Kind of along the lines of Councilman Carrico. I actually was wondering about the connection, but it not being vehicular traffic, being pedestrian traffic between the historic Black Business District there, coming on down.
Right here.
Because you've got some businesses that don't have frontage there. I think opening that up might be a really great way to encourage pedestrian traffic there and opening up opportunities mid-block
Okay.
without having traffic as the front.
So you're saying there's some businesses here that have a
Yes.
lack of access. Great, that's good to know. We did consider that at some point. It doesn't show up well here, but we do like that. That would make a lot of sense.
Yeah, I would love to see that kind of mirroring of the pedestrian corridor, which could have art, it could have green space in it, that kind of thing, as opposed to vehicular traffic coming through there. And I'd like to, if it's anybody else's pleasure, to see that kind of conceptualized out and thought out some more. Because one of the things we talked about when we were talking about this corridor was not just, and this blocking system, was to not just create more blocks that were bound by vehicular traffic, but to look at ways, much like Melbourne, Melbourne, Australia, that is. I got to see that, and they have a wonderful lane system where you've got space for restaurants in the middle of what used to be street blocks that are no longer open to vehicular traffic. It's the same thing in Birmingham, England. They've got these wonderful old buildings, and you've got seating space. And they did the same thing in Pike Place Market in Seattle. I loved it. And so I think this is our opportunity to look at creating those kinds of interactive spaces that people were talking about in the meetings that you have.
Great, good input, thank you. Let me just briefly show you, we did do another scenario where we grew the public space, the park space, essentially doubling it just as a consideration. It reduces some of the developable area. It wraps the street around the other side, just as a thought, because as a committee, we did talk about the scale and what that use could be. This is big enough to serve as a little, a small district gathering space, food trucks, little gatherings, but this might serve downtown better for more events and such, something to consider. Graphically, this was some of the imagery that you all voted on 2 years ago out of our work session with you all. So we think, this could sort of echo the character of the district that we're showing here. We're showing a little bit less in stories based on the program we've currently got. Real quickly, just tying those, rotating the plans with north to the left, tying that all the way through from Augusta, having Andrew Street come all the way through all these blocks down to Celebidi. Very nice connectivity, paralleling the railroad tracks. We're showing you Bicentennial Park is planned as part of that whole corridor. We think that'd be an amazing improvement to connectivity and pedestrian vehicular traffic. And then what that looks like for the trails map for the link trail. We do propose just high-level idea that there be an intersection placed here, a stoplight at the end of Andrew. Well, it's the boulevard there now, so that you can get the link trail to come across. At this point, much safer than coming through this section here.
Ryan, could you step on to next steps, please?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Next step. Feedback we will take from you all tonight. We welcome email conversation, or if you want to communicate through the city manager's office to us, any input you have to influence the evolution of the plans you saw tonight. We will create from that what we call a vision book that will be highly graphic, plan diagrams and photographs and three-dimensional drawings to help you all portray this vision to potential partners in the 57 East Broad Street parcel. We will also create a technical guide called Master Streets Plan, where we put all this in the CAD for your staff to help implement those streets and right-of-ways. And then we're also going to create that phasing and implementation guide, which is where we start to give some insights onto some development controls, zoning recommendations, maybe some incentives to invite development here, and then also some of the architectural recommendations for building.
We appreciate you being here.
Thank
As I
you.
said, we've got a hard stop. I will make you a
understand.
pledge and a promise. The next time we have one of these work sessions, there will not be a hard stop at the end of it.
Great.
We'll be able to go on until we get everything you need from us. And
No problem.
I apologize for that this evening.
Thank you,
But the project schedule that you've got looks interesting.
Yes.
And I think it's aggressive, but that's what we need here at this point. Not making mistakes, but moving forward. And I would offer to the council that we've got questions, we've got comments through the city council's office, and let's craft up what we've got coming out of tonight.
Great.
So, anyone else, any quick questions? I don't want to get into detail. We don't have time, sorry.
Yes. We are happy to project this, by the way, if you all feel that we need more time to consider the plans, we don't have to stick to the next deliverable at September 10th.
No,
Happy
we've
to
been
push
at
that out.
this for a while. We know how, we do know how to extend. So we'd rather extend than make a mistake. So we appreciate
Understood.
your hard work, dedication on this project. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Okay, good.
Good evening.
5 minutes, ladies and gentlemen, we'll start our 6:30 council meeting.